because he lives. My life is worth living just because he lives. For this resurrection, Easter Sunday, I want us to consider the implications of the resurrection as it reflects and teaches about the power of God. 1 Corinthians 15 is a well-known verse where we often, perhaps at funerals, we read Paul's writing, where, O death, is your sting, where, O grave, is your victory, or as the New Revised has it, where, O death, is your victory, where, O death, is your sting. It is hard to read that and don't hear as though a challenge went out, and the challenge is going out. It is hard to read that and not hear that one takes on a challenge and is confident of victory. Well, perhaps by now you have come to appreciate that what can be considered our greatest foe as mortals is something called death. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how strong, doesn't matter how smart, it doesn't matter where you've come from. One simple truth exists. Show me a mortal man other than Jesus Christ who can take on death and defeat it. Not a single human being has been able to take on this battle and succeed. You are just as aware as I am that there are people who are strong and fit and healthy, and death took them. There are people who are smart, intelligent. Perhaps their heads are too small to accommodate the size of their brain. Yet death took them. There are persons who are young and vibrant, full of potential and possibility, active and energetic, and death defeated them. There are persons who have spent their years eating right, following all the nutritionist and health guidelines as to how to keep the body in optimum shape, and death defeated them. There are persons, I'm sure you're aware, who have been confident that they will be around long enough to bury their parents, and death defeated them. Can you identify anyone who is confident enough in whatever abilities they have to be able to take on death and win and succeed? That's why some have often said death is the great equalizer. Because it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor, how young, how old, how tall, how short, how fat, how slim, how big, how small, how smart, how foolish, how healthy, how sick. Haven't you seen it? That people who are sick and waiting to die outlive the caretakers who are healthy and anticipating planning a funeral. None of us has and can ever boast about the possibility of challenging death and win. But here, when you read 1 Corinthians 15, Paul speaks with this confident, almost like David to Goliath. Where, O death, is your sting? You can't touch me again. Where, O grave, is your victory? If you read carefully, you hear that the confidence of which Paul speaks of is because of Jesus' resurrection. So in this profound statement by Paul, what we may miss is that here is Paul telling us that the resurrection demonstrates the power of God, a power no man has. Because it's only God through Jesus Christ was able to defeat death. If there ever was a true conquer death, Jesus is the man. No, I said true conquer death because there was another conquer death I knew of. I'm trying to remember if I ever met him or when I went to the village they told me about him. This man, those are the older ones who know there was a time when cholera, people used to pronounce people as dead. Any of you older ones remember hearing those stories? Cholera. They used to pronounce people as dead, but the people weren't really dead. So this man, having been pronounced as dead, they have him in the coffin going to the burial ground, singing, and then they started to hear him knocking. So say, wait, look here, what's going on? When they stopped to listen, the knocking sound was coming from the coffin. And the man said, hey, y'all let me out here. Well, I don't need to tell you. What happened after that? People dropped the coffin and every man Jack Harry run. So he got the nickname Conquer Death. He didn't conquer death. He wasn't truly dead. But we have no doubt that Jesus died. He was there 3 days in the grave. And then we can sing, up from the grave he arose with a mighty triumph over his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with the saints to reign. Isn't it true that if there's one time in our life we feel powerless, is in the face of death? Have you had someone near to you pass and you wish you could do something about it? Have you heard of stories where people in the face of death feel so powerless? And worse yet, I prayed and I fasted and I begged God and nothing happened. And wish that even just God, I could pray God and there could be a miracle and death still takes the person. Have you heard of or felt that powerlessness? That's how powerful death is. That the people we love, we have no control over how long we have them for. Because unexpectedly death could come at our door and we didn't invite him in. When we hear what Scripture says, what is impossible with man is possible with God. And so when death demonstrates our own limitations, weaknesses, and shortcomings, the resurrection of Jesus manifests the opposite, the power of God over death and hell. Come on, are you with me? That in the resurrection, when man is faced with his own powerlessness, his own inability, God, through the resurrection, demonstrates his awesome power. That's why we could speak of God as omnipotent, because we're saying that God has the power to do anything and everything, and even death. God has power over that too. Wow. Up from the grave, he arose with a mighty triumph over his foes, and the greatest foe, death. He arose a victor from the dark domain and lives forever with the saints to reign. He arose. Hallelujah. Guys, arose. So how do we respond to the evidence of great power? How do we respond to the evidence of great power? One of the important responses to power is fear. One of the important responses to power is fear. Because what? Power, while it on the one hand reveals one's ability to cause certain outcomes, on the other hand, it reveals the other person's inability to do something about it. Let me explain. If a gunman comes in your house and you feel like a lamb to the slaughter, that's when you are more likely to be afraid. Am I correct? You can't do nothing. You see him with a gun and there's nothing you could do about it. But what if you have a body armor? Not just a bulletproof vest, but a body armor, so you're well covered. The bullet can't penetrate. Would you still normally be afraid? In fact, you feel bright with yourself now. And the gunman come and the guy gun this on you. Sometimes you say, shoot now. So you gain a certain amount of confidence because you know that he no longer has the power to cause certain outcomes that you cannot neutralize or mitigate. So when power is demonstrated, the opposite to that is a feeling of powerlessness that can lead us to a place of fear. Now this is a complex issue. And one sermon could never sufficiently explore this. Has so many nuances to it, especially when you consider perfect love casts out fear, and God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of sound mind. There are all kinds of stuff to put together in this. But I want you to also appreciate that there is a direct relationship between power and fear, because while power demonstrates ability on the one hand, it demonstrates inability on the other. That's where the fear comes from. Without the inability and the powerlessness, we are not afraid. Think about it. Think about it. If you go by Brother Holland, he has a poodle. In fact, let me call it a half poodle. Thing so small, look like a head bar. You go in the yard and you see the half poodle. And the thing making noise. In fact, hey, what's wrong with that? Brother, what's wrong with that little piece of dog? Yes. And you're not afraid. You're not afraid. Why? Because you don't think the dog has power to cause certain outcomes that you cannot neutralize. Are you with me? Because in your mind, if the dog rushes you, man, I give it 2 kicks. So you are not afraid. Why do you feel so bright and smug about yourself? Because you're watching a little harpoon. But the whole other dog, you see, guy what? While a pit bull just peep out, you just see the head. Hello, are you with me? Just the head you see. And the size of that dog there, you say, boy, if that dog rushes me, I do not have the ability to neutralize the potential outcome. So now all of a sudden, you move from not being afraid, but the holder, me don't like dog, make sure you hold that dog there properly. So that when we cannot manage or manipulate the outcome, that's when we are more given to fear. So fear therefore has an important place. Because one of the places of fear is fear recognizes power and admits powerlessness. Come on, tell me if you get that. You see, one of the important values of fear, that's why I say it's a serious subject to explore, because there's so many nuances to it. But one of the important principles of fear is that fear recognizes power and it admits powerlessness. So even the man who going to go to the whole yard and see the big dog, who you say, boy, he's not afraid. The reason he may not be afraid is because he thinks he has the ability to neutralize any potential consequence. So that if the dog tried to rush him, he feels, don't worry, I know how to deal with dog. So he's not afraid. But if he ain't know how to deal with dog and he see the dog make 2 foot so, you're surprised to see how he gets 4 foot to go so. So fear recognizes power on the one hand and and admits powerlessness on the other. So we just said in the resurrection, one of the things that was affirmed in the resurrection is what? Power of God, am I correct? Now, so on the one hand there is a power of God, and that power is an ability to do things that you and I cannot neutralize. Am I correct? And in the presence of the power of God, we becoming more aware of our powerlessness should say, boy, I want to make sure I be on the right side of this thing. Hello, are you with me? You sure you get that, right? So fear is a healthy response to power. Now, in case you don't get why that is important, let me go back to Genesis. Do you remember the first thing God did? God said to Adam and Eve, well, Adam, said do this and don't do that. And then God's power over creation was demonstrated when God installed consequences in creation. Come on, are you with me here? So he says, obey me and you will live, disobey me and you will die. So one of the first things God did was to install consequence in this world. Paul later on puts it in this way, you reap what you sow. That's a divine principle that God has created the world with consequence. Are you hearing that? You reap what you sow. Actions have consequences. That's how God created the world, and it doesn't matter how much you think you're smart, you cannot change that simple principle. So, we in Genesis, Satan comes to Eve. You remember what Satan said to Eve? First thing Satan says to Eve is don't worry about consequences. You can neutralize. Don't worry about consequences. He says, if you eat the fruit, you will not die. So he reasons away consequence. And she thinks that is all. So there is no consequence to my action. In fact, he goes further. He goes further. When you take away outcomes and consequence, you shift the balance of power. You sure you with me? Alright, so let's use brother hold the dog again. So the first time the dog rush you, or the first time the dog peep out, you say, boy, you run. Then you later learn that the dog is a little play dog and no trouble no man. Are you with me? Now all of a sudden, the equation begins to change. You now realize, number one, let me say the dog ain't got no teeth, or the dog is stupid, or whatever it be. When you get certain kind of the power equation change, now you come in the yard and say, dog, move your stupid self, go lie down. Are you with me? That, and in the same way, when the gunman comes at you, when you feel vulnerable and powerless, you then are afraid. But the minute you put on your body armor, In fact, you want to go up to you, but shoot now, you think you're bad. So the equation of power change. I tell you as a young man. That's why I started walking with a penknife, not, them switchblade. And after less than a week, I stopped walking with a switchblade. I said, nah, this will get me in trouble. This is why. When you go, somebody bounce you. If you feel they could beat you, come on, talk to me. You might pick a small bar and say, man, what's wrong with you? And you're going to your business. Because you believe that they have the power to beat you, and you feel powerless before them. Well, when I say I had to carry the switchblade, even before they bounce me, they just pass me. Oh, what's wrong with you, boy? Because I feel empowered because I know if you come at me, I got something here to put on you. So because I feel now that if you attack me, I have the potential to negate the consequences, I now feel. So here when Satan goes to Eve, Satan says, don't worry about consequence. And then he said, you will be like God. You ain't got to bother with nobody and nothing. So when consequences are diminished and fear is lost, we feel big. Now, is it possible that while we gather today and celebrate the resurrection of our Lord, which is supposed to be, as a church, we are affirming the awesome power of God and the need for man to humble himself before this God? Is it that we have lost a sense of the real power of God because Satan continues to whisper in our ear and work in our lives to eliminate the phenomenon of fear and consequence, and it makes us feel more autonomous, powerful, and independent? Think about it. More and more in our world, aren't we trying to make man more like God? Let me explain. Let me go the other way around. More and more, haven't we been working to eliminate consequence? So God says, do this and not do that. But what if I could do what God said not to do, or not do what God said to do, and neutralize the consequence? Then I could do anything I want to do. Come on, walk with me again. Let me go again. God said, don't eat the fruit. But what if I could eat the fruit and there's no consequence to it? Then I am God. I could do what I want. Isn't it true that more and more we have invested our efforts not in learning obedience to God, but in figuring out how we could disobey God and neutralize the consequence so that we could do more of what we want? You say that again. Isn't it true that instead of spending our effort obeying God, learning, trying to obey God, we now spend more time and effort trying to figure out how to neutralize consequence so we could become more like God and do what we want? One of the things I found interesting when I was dealing with the PANCAP and HIV and AIDS, I was a part of a couple of meetings they invited me to. I couldn't figure out back then. They identified two groups, vulnerable groups. High risk group, MSMs, men who have sex with men, and commercial sex workers. And I discovered that all the effort was in how could we neutralize consequence. So one of the consequences, they tell you, men who have sex with men, commercial sex workers, high risk. So one of the consequences of their behavior is AIDS. Well, HIV. And then AIDS. How could we mitigate against that consequence? Therefore, so they could continue having sex with men or continue being commercial sex workers. So I couldn't figure it out. We were going to these seminars and all the effort was on AIDS, medicine development, and how we could get more people to get tested so they would know their status, so they could get onto treatment. Here, the approach to fighting AIDS has been the importance of people getting tested so they could know their status, so that they could be on treatment. And how can we make treatment more available and affordable? Because it used to be very expensive. And I'm trying to figure out, but wait. This sounds like Satan and Eve again. Because all the focus is how could we neutralize consequence rather than pursue obedience. Anybody here? Now instead, they say, well, let me try a man to see how we could discourage the behavior. Let me find out what are the issues that people are struggling with. We maybe have to invest more time and effort. But that's not the approach. Because still, we want to empower man to do whatever he wants with the hope that there will be no consequence. Isn't that how we behave? The things we do a lot of times in life. We make choices based on the consequences we perceive we can manage and negotiate. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. years ago said, human beings are no longer interested in keeping the 10 commandments. He said they're interested in keeping the 11th one. Thou shalt not get caught. He said, our primary goal in life is not to be obedient to God, it's how to be disobedient and get away with it. So we're not fighting and putting our efforts towards obedience. We are putting our efforts towards disobedience and figuring out as best as we could how is it we can negate the consequences. Because we want to be able to smoke and don't have to worry about our lungs. So we try to invent more and more medication and try to figure out ways of people vaping and doing other stuff so they could still smoke but hopefully not get us sick. We try to find ways that people could drink and then damage the liver and all kind of stuff. We try to figure out ways that people could choose to live certain lifestyle and they could go around and have sex with as many people as they want and there shouldn't be any consequence to that. So, we try to make sure there's contraceptive and there's abortion, and some of you would know now in the US is a big thing. They have abortion pill they're trying to make available legally in all clinics. So that means that you're free. Don't put your effort in trying to maintain abstinence till you're married. What's that? What's that? Till you're married, you've got to be practical. Instead, if you miss and you get pregnant, especially if you have certain plans in life and you have certain career goals, and then the fellow he tells you he wasn't ready for this, go take a tablet and kill the child. So you don't have to, you think, we're coming back to that, you don't have to deal with it. And how are we bringing up our children? We're bringing up our children where parents know are working like if they're the Satan. So they're trying their best to find a way to eliminate consequence. The thing is so ridiculous. Brother Joe feel a teacher and Sister Diana a teacher. That teachers in here. When the child do wrong and the teacher try to put a punishment, money coming down in school, will you punish the child for? You say, but what craziness this is? Miss, you going to tell me? The parent knows you send the child to school. The child don't even do the homework. How much time the child come back with the homework book not finished, miss? Tell me for it. And when the term done, and the child fails, they're coming down to teacher. Because teacher father the problem. But if you're not work with the child, if you're not make sure the child is not working, you're not going to expect the action will happen. But guess what? And here, we have created systems now. So even if the child fails, just put them up. Hello? Parents know, you're hearing them. Well, things was rough for me growing up. So you know want to shelter the child from consequences. So every little thing you're trying to buy for the child, give the child. So the hardship and difficulties and challenges you learn, you could shelter the child from all that. What foolishness is that? So some of the children is like they live in a 5-star hotel. 10, 11, 12 o'clock, them now rolling out of bed to sit down and meet breakfast in bed. So what? Mommy don't wash up dish, clean up kitchen, clean up the yard, sweep up the house. And then, when they come up and they sit down and they see the breakfast there, I don't want that. I prefer a scrambled egg this morning. Alright, but eat it now. No, mommy, me want that. Man, alright. Hello? You got children now, 16, 17, 18, and can't wash a dish? What kind of craziness is that? Because parents feel their duty is not to help children learn consequence, but is to shield the children from consequences. Satan doing that, no man. Hello? So children are growing up now without a sense of consequence because mommy and daddy is sheltering them from all the consequences as best as they can. And so they grow up now, and many of them have lacking emotional intelligence, but they don't have a sense that there are consequences to wrong and there are choices that they have to make. And because mommy, daddy are always there to the rescue. We feel we're doing the children some good. So they don't learn. You reap what you sow. Actions, consequences. Because we think our duty is to shield and shelter them. And so it's a wicked thing in society where you're hearing, I remember Reverend Smith was telling me from Fiji, he said coming to the Caribbean, he's shocked to see how much parents cover for children, how much brothers covered for sisters and sisters covered. And he said, well in Fiji, if I am brother Holder's brother, and I gone and sleep all dark, cuss bad word, and so brother Holder is the one reporting me to church. Brother Holder is the first one who reporting his brother. So Reverend Smith said, Rev, I can't understand. He go to a meeting and he trying to deal with a leader who wasn't working, doing right. And the people who fighting it is the family. Because somewhere along the line, we doing the work of Satan, trying to eliminate consequence. But you can't. Because what Eve did not discover and realize, brothers and sisters, that when Satan said you will not die, physical death was delayed, but you're still dying. Hello, are you with me? And that's what some parents discover. Some people discover you put off the consequence, but it's still coming for you. And some of us don't even realize what we reap is what our parents suffer us. Hello? Careful what you're sowing for your children. Satan says to Eve, don't worry about consequence. Nobody can do you nothing. God can't do you nothing. You'll do it and get away. And guess what? It is part of the problem in the church. We have developed some theologies like that make us feel we could do whatever we want and get away with it. That's why we can't get holiness in the church, you know. That's why people are not growing and maturing in the church, you know. Because at the back of our minds, whatever we do or we want to do, we go get away with it. So that's why more and more we misrepresent the love of God and the grace of God. And so we have this idea that this forgiveness of God means we could continue presumptuously sinning and God will forgive us and we're still getting to heaven. You ask the average church person where they're going when they're dead. And they will tell you something you wonder you early and you have no conscience. But it's because in our mind, same thing Paul had to address in Romans 6. Shall we continue to sin that grace may abound? Because many of us have this idea that the grace of God is permission to keep sinning. It's permission not to aspire to be perfect in Christ. It's permission not to be transformed. It's permission not to keep working on being better. It's permission for lukewarmness. It don't work so. So we give God this half-piece, half-baked thing because we believe, no man, God is so wicked. That's how we just put it, you know. So, you mean like how I miss one Sunday, Reverend, to be God so wicked he could send me here for one Sunday? Yes. If you willfully decide you're choosing against him, you feel what happened. You're trying to make it sound like it's one Sunday. It's one Sunday demonstrating what is in your mind. That anytime you come like Cain to the Lord, feeling, well, so if at least I bring something. God doesn't honor that. The Bible tells us so. That you willfully bring less than your best to God. Cain. And feel it ain't going to have no consequence. Cain thought he could just bring anything. And like some of us feel once you bring something. And he brings something and God says, no, me accepting that. Cain got so vexed he go take it out on his brother. You remember that? And so Cain killed Abel. And as Oliver said, Cain killed Abel because he took him in his navel. Take a fork, and choke him in the navel. There are consequences, and don't make Satan fool you. You can't get away except in and through Jesus Christ. That's the message Paul is saying. Paul is saying that effectively the greatest consequence in life is what sin causes: eternal death. You remember Romans says what? The wages of sin is death. Now which of us are not sinners and have not sinned? So then all of us have a sentence of death. And I just said to you earlier, it doesn't matter how bright you are, how smart you are, none of us could defeat them except through Jesus Christ. That's why John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, so that, you hear that, so that whoever accepts him, believes him, lives trusting in his word, surrenders their life to him, will not meet the sentence or the consequence of death. The only way you and I could get away from the sentence and consequence of sin, which is death, is when we believe in Jesus Christ. We will then have everlasting life. So don't let Satan fool you, make you think you can get away. You may get away in the immediate, but it coming. The consequences of disobeying God, of sin, they come. I cannot, none of us sin with impunity. So this foolish idea that we could sin and guess what? We'll get away with it because God is gracious and loving and forgiving. And then we have some foolish churches and pastors now saying there's no hell. Because again, it's the idea of trying to give people a reason to sin and don't worry about consequence. Because think about it. If when you don't do all this stupidness, you ain't going to be in no hell. Yeah, that sounds nice. So I could live however I want. Because when there is a lack of consequences, we become very prideful. We do what we want. We become very irresponsible and reckless. And think about it. Because we think we could get away with it, we do less than what God requires and do simply what suits us. So I come when it suits me. I cuss when it suits me. I lie when it suits me. I don't lie all the time, but it's only when it suits me. I don't cuss all the time, but it's only when it suits me. I don't thief normally, but when it suits me. Because guess what? I am faithful in walking out the 11th commandment. I wouldn't get caught. I'm going to get away with it. Because if anything, just before death, I go pray hard. Or I go just go and ask God for forgiveness. Lord, forgive me. And we think that's how this thing does work. That's why I have a problem with this idea that after carnival you got Lent and you ask God for forgiveness during Lent. What foolishness is that? Which God we dealing with it? So you sin for carnival. You ask for forgiveness to Lent. So you could sin for next carnival. What stupidness is that? And we call that sensible Christian theology. Come on, man. That's Satan whispering in your ears, you shall not die. Go back next year, it's culture. And ask for forgiveness again. God is loving. That's Satan saying to Eve, you shall not die. And that's why the very heart of carnival includes the idea of do what you want, free up. It's the same thing. Because so long as you believe there are no consequences, you feel empowered to do what suits you, when it suits you, and how it suits you. And that's one of the reasons more and more in our world we see the absence of a fear of God. People no longer demonstrating a sense of fear. They don't think that God has any real power. Because God doesn't strike down with lightning one time, so everybody moves to finish. People now behave as if they could do anything and there's no consequence. We're going to be in church and fellas going to pass and park up and play the sound system and laugh. They find it funny. Funeral service going on now and fellas in the churchyard smoking hard and drinking. In fact, people sometimes come in the church, walk on in there and drinking hard and drink. So, there's no fear of God. We don't think that there are consequences to this foolishness we're doing. I remember once, I said, boy, this thing really get crazy. I remember once I see two young people, young adults, not young people, sit down in church. They're not married, and they sit down in church, Brother Joe feel, boy, the thing, it was really hard to Brother Joe feel, they sit down in church, and she got she leg over here, he got here, and they put the leg and thing. In church, they're not married, and my husband, what they tell about? In church! Now, the same God who tell you, stay away from them kind of thing, so because that kind of touch up there now only in church. Hello, are you with me? It's as if you have no fear that your actions will have consequences. Because you feel wrong when you don't do it, you just ask God for forgiveness. Maybe no. That's where we have failed. We have failed as a church. Maybe we have not helped sufficiently to connect the dots. Because I'm convinced that there are a whole lot of consequences already evident right in our eyes. But we don't pay attention enough to see them. And maybe we have not helped. Because we too have a short memory. I remember saying to persons, and it's still fresh, so people still talking. I said to some persons, I said, look, I am of the view that if somebody who is don't understand how God created human beings, who recommended social distancing as a solution to COVID. I said, the fact that they say social distancing, that sounds like somebody who in their own age is antisocial. They just sit down in the office and make all kind of decision. Because if you know the very nature of how God created us, you know we are social beings and we need social interaction. So you can say physical distancing or something about social distance, something else going on in the language. And I said, what? When we have our children locked up, and we try to spend more time locking them up than letting them go, for 2, 3, 4 years, I say, when there's emotional intelligence and there's social interaction and there's sense of peopleness is so diminished. That's my own word of course. And then 12 years from now, they become more aggressive. They become more antisocial. By then, we won't be wondering what happened 12 years ago. We wouldn't be connecting it with today. And you check out how many of our decisions you have parents who feel. I remember somebody said, well, me want a father, I'm just like child. I said, all right, get the child. And then, when the child now reached 18, did well in school, but they got no real respect for anybody and all that. As far as you're concerned, you ain't connecting it with the decision you made to have the child. Is these days children really got no behavior? Hello? We don't connect the dots, and the church doesn't help to connect the dots. So people still don't get it. That their actions have consequences. But the greatest consequence of all is hell. And thankfully, Paul says, through Jesus Christ, that's the only way we could mitigate against and neutralize the consequence of hell. That's why Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me, though they die, yet shall they live. And whoever live and believe in me will not be overcome by death. That's the solution. And I've learned that Jesus helps us to navigate consequence. He doesn't entirely eliminate them. Hello? So in other words, if you went and thief and they lock you up and you start praying and give your life to the Lord, it doesn't mean you ain't going to still get locked up, sorry. Are you with me? But it may very well be that when you get locked up, that experience becomes such a transformative one that God takes it and makes it something good. So it's not that Jesus eliminates consequences. That's why Paul could say, all things work together for good to them that love the Lord. So I tell people all the time, there are foolish things we have done in our life. But when we surrender our lives to Jesus Christ, it's not that the consequences no longer exist. But Jesus is able to use even the bad that we have done and make something good with it. But that comes only when we truly surrender. Not no half-baked surrender, but all to Jesus I surrender, all to Him I freely give. I will ever love and trust Him in His presence daily.